Welcome to Tossing Grenade the Windmills. Windmills.
So, I think that the reason I started this podcast was Ken and I had written this novel, and I think it's a pretty good one, even though it probably does still need a couple of edit passes. But the advantage of writing a novel with someone else is that you're able to basically do edit passes on the parts of the novel that the other person has written. So it's a lot more polished than something I would have done simply on my own. I've found that with the current novel I'm working on, I've had to... But I think that the thing I really liked about the podcast idea was that I could give it a final edit pass with my voice and the way I was reading it, and we could still get it out there. So hope you're enjoying so far, all two of you. And in the meantime, here is Chapter 33, Precyber by T.C. Ricks and Ken Leitner. Clark was a bit depressed. He was very glad to be alive. He was even happier that he had something that he could do to strike back at the people who had done this to him, even if it was still in a very abstract way. But he had not really been able to do anything directly, and he still felt bad about the fact that Barfman's killer was out there, getting away with it. He couldn't risk contacting any of his old friends again, since he might get them hurt. And then there was Emily. The more rational part of his mind told him that contacting her was a really bad idea. But in his heart, he didn't care. He knew he would have to talk to her, but at this point, she thought he was dead. It might be wiser to let it stay that way. Plus, she had kind of dumped him in the end. Did she even want to hear from him if he was still alive? He managed to come to a compromise with himself that he would just figure out a way of contacting her even if he decided not to use it. But how exactly would he do that? He went back and forth and finally decided the direct approach would work best. Clark found Gabriel pulling some weeds in an urban garden in one of those terraces. It was pretty elaborate, with lots of tomato vines pouring over the side, and with hydroponics feeding some of the more persnickety plants. A couple of mirrors at the base reflected sunlight back at the plants to extend the amount of sunlight that he could harvest through the window. Clark found him just as he was finishing up. "Hey, Gabriel, do you guys have any computer access? Any way to send email?" Gabriel looked at him for a few minutes and nodded. "Yeah, Clark, I think it's a good time I showed you this." They took the elevator to the top floor of the building. It creaked and groaned a few times. The old plaque on the door said capacity 30 people, but to Clark it felt like 2 was really pushing it. When they finally got to the top, at first he thought it was just empty. As if reading his mind, Gabriel said, "That's just for appearances. Just because we guard this place doesn't mean that the people might not accidentally find their way up to the elevator." He motioned Clark around the corner and towards the southwest corner of the building. Clark was stunned. The array of computer equipment before him was a lot more impressive than the one he had at home. 6 terminals, some of them aging, were linked to a ring with comfortable but worn leather chairs in front of them. A woman sat at one of them typing away, but upon seeing Gabriel, she nodded politely and went back towards the stairs in the back. Clark noticed that all the windows had been spray-painted black. It made the room look almost surreal, with flicks of invisible sunlight still managing to eke through the windows, mixing the flickering fluorescent bulbs that could obviously do with replacing. Cables ran all along the computers, and he could see 4 or 5 smaller servers, though they all looked old. He heard that people could sometimes put impressive networks together with abandoned equipment, but this was ridiculous. He felt certain that he could use it to contact Emily. The most impressive piece of equipment attracted his attention last. It stood 10 feet tall and lay within a cooled metal cylinder. It looked like something that belonged on sci-fi, but Clark knew that it was quite real. Small lasers moved in and out of it, with a dozen gleaming lights along the side. "What is that?" Clark said, pointing at the thing. "That," Gabriel smiled, "is the reason that there is still something to call a revolution. It's really the only edge we have, which is, it's called the shadow net. It lets us bypass the main net without having to use the normal grid or satellites. It's the ultimate dark net." Clark blinked and looked at the box. He had read something about this before, but he thought no one had actually done it. Clark did know that the theory behind quantum data teleportation. A photon would simply vanish and reappear somewhere else. Researchers knew what happened, but getting the photon to disappear when you wanted it and reappear where you wanted it still stumped most of the academic world. Apparently, someone on Gabriel's team had solved the problem. "Who?" Gabriel laughed. "Don't expect to learn all our secrets in one day. In fact, it's entirely probable you never will. This lets us coordinate our movements without the corps knowing. They've tried to find these a lot of times, but they've always failed." Clark looked it up and down. He was quite impressed. "What else does it do? What? Untraceable and safe communications isn't enough for you?" "Well, I mean..." Gabriel waved Clark off dismissively and shook his head. "Unbelievable. I swear your generation takes too many things for granted." He walked off towards the elevator. Clark could swear he heard muttering something about going up the hill both ways in the snow while he was at it. Clark leaned back in the chair and started to think of other ways that he could help Gabriel out with his equipment. It took all of 15 milliseconds for Clark to decide on gold farming as his next project. The trick was how to do it in such a way to hurt the corporation and not the player. Either way, Clark needed some cash of his own, so he decided to restart the farming first and work out the details later. There were plenty of idle computers here. He would need to restart his accounts, or probably create new ones. He would need to get a hold of some of the backups Emily would hopefully bring. Finally, he would need a fake ID and some kind of safe bank accounts to accumulate the money on. He started with the ID question. "Horse, I need an ID. Can you guys create fake IDs?" Horse was sitting at a desk playing a game on one of the newer computers. The game had his full attention, so he didn't acknowledge Clark at first. Clark decided to walk over and see what was holding Horse's attention. The game apparently involved walking around and killing everything in sight. It grabbed some slight moral legitimacy by the fact that everyone in sight was supposed to be infected with some alien virus that made them super strong and super violent. The graphics were hyper-realistic. When Horse hit a target with his harpoon, the harpoon hit the enemy's arm bone with a sickening crunch. The game showed blood spraying in all directions and the limp arm hanging down by threads of flesh. It didn't stop there. The wounded assailant stopped and ripped the useless arm off. As the arm separated from the shoulder, little blood-soaked alien worms broke free, fell to the ground, and started squirming around on the floor. Other putrid yellow worms flailed in a gaping wound as they struggled to burrow back into the body. Pus dripped down as they made their way inward. It made Clark more than a little nauseated. Finally, Horse reached a save point, and Clark tried to get his attention again. "Horse, can I ask you a question?" Horse visibly relaxed as he watched the game screen shift to a new level introduction. He shifted back in his chair and turned to face Clark. Clark took that as an affirmative answer and continued, "I need to make up some fake IDs. At least one for each of us, possibly more. Can we get that easily enough here?" "Horse has one already. I can get one for Clark as well. If you need more than one, you'll have to check with Gabriel. They cost a little money, and Gabriel wants us to make sure that they aren't abused." "Okay, let's start with one, and maybe I'll talk to Gabriel and see if we need more. I also need a safe bank account tied to the new IDs. We're going to need to raise a little e-money up here, and we'll need someplace safe to store it." Horse said, "Gabriel can tie an offshore account to your ID. It makes your ID more vulnerable, so Horse doesn't have one." "Sounds perfect. How soon?" "Gabriel gave the ID to me yesterday. He said to hold on to it until you asked for it." Clark smiled at the pleasant surprise and asked, "Can I have it now?" Horse got up and walked over to a small corner where a little cot was set up. He reached over to the crate that served as a nightstand and pulled off the top sheet of paper on the envelope. The sheet of paper contained a print out of details of Clark's new identity. His new name would be Lee Majors. Lee had an account in Belize with $500 of e-money already on hand. Clark said, "Gabriel told me to tell you that you owe him $500. Clark laughed and said, "Okay, well, we better get to work paying him back then, hadn't we?" He opened the envelope to find a few of the necessary cards, a driver's license, and a few credit cards. There would be no SEBA card, but the real Clark didn't have one of those either. Clark looked up and asked, "How many of these computers work?" Horst replied, "There are about 4 or 5 setups working, but Horst thinks most of it works." Clark grinned. "Okay, then how about we start stacking them up on desks and try them out? There are so many here, I think we could put 2 or 3 on each desk. The trick is to toss out anything problematic. If we throw it in a pile, then we won't be able to tell the bad ones from the untested ones." Horst grunted, obviously displeased by the interruption in his game, but he got up and started arranging computers. Clark picked up a dusty computer box and started connecting it to a main keyboard and monitor. While he worked, he considered his options for initializing the accounts. Ideally, he could transfer his old accounts to the new ID. However, there was an obvious risk in tying his real name to the new one anyway. He could ask Samuel to do the transfer, but it still seemed overly risky. He decided to create brand new accounts through the normal website forms. The downside was that someone would have to level the new characters up high enough to make some money. However, Clark had a suspicion that Horst might help out there in his downtime. "Hey, Horst, how'd you like to play some games for money?" Horst dropped his old CRT monitor when he heard the question. He cried out, "Is that possible?" Clark smiled and touched his nose. "Well, it might be. We'll have to see. Want to find out?" Horst nodded. "Damn straight Horst would like to find out about it. Say, do you mind if I ask?" Clark hesitated. "What?" "Why do you talk in the third person?" Clark fiddled with the game, trying to make it work. "Huh? You talk in the third person. Why is that?" Horst know what third person is. It means, why don't you ever say I? Ah, superstitious. Horst believed that if he distances himself from reality, it will not affect him as much. What the hell? Clark, did you get Horst psychoanalyzing himself? It's a gift. Ready to play? Better than this.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I'm Thomas Ricks. Music by Melanie Ricks. Voices by Skip Huffman and Josie Bergen-Lawson. Copyright 2012.
Kenneth Leitner
And Red Anvil Amalgamated.
to fight the forces of evil!